Awesome. All right. Welcome, welcome. It is February 7th here today, and we are joined by Valerie Keefe. She is a trans rights and human rights activist from Alberta, and she's going to talk to us today about the problems of cisfeminism, particularly with regards to the effect that it's had on overwhelming the dialogue in left-wing politics. So Valerie, maybe you can give us a bit of a background about your role you played in Alberta politics over the past couple of years with the Freedom Conservative Party, and also how the issue of trans rights and trans representation has been approached in that province.
Yeah, sure. Well, I had stayed out of politics directly. I mean, I was doing some writing and commentating for the Queer Voices section of Huffington Post, among other places. But when the Notley government got elected in 2015,
has been
the work that I had been doing on hormone replacement access kind of met for the last 3 years before that. Gained a greater degree of salience, because here's a government that's very vocal about being pro LGBTQ2S and sometimes Y, very vocal about being pro reproductive rights, pro women's rights. And I'd been writing about how in my community there were very large barriers to accessing this very safe reproductive medicine in hormone replacement. Where do I begin? There is nothing that is more efficacious in terms of reducing suicidality, in terms of reported satisfaction among trans people who access it. Nothing more effective in reducing depression than hormone replacement. And what I saw instead was a focus on, in fact, a degree of coercion towards genital reconstruction and other invasive and expensive surgeries that have a not as positive track record, especially with respect to genital reconstruction, which leaves 10% roughly with persistent sexual dysfunction, and renders everyone who gets it sterile. And the more that I saw this differentiation of concern, the more that I saw us picking the more expensive route, the more I got irritated, and the more I started to dig and also relate my experiences as a teenage young New Democrat to what I was seeing now. After trying to simply appeal to the government, and for that matter, every opposition member of the legislature I could find on this, a friend of mine, Sheldon Johnston, referred me to the Freedom Conservatives. And I was very clear with them. This is October of 2018. I said, look, if Derek Fildebrandt is willing to get real about hormone replacement and the illegal barriers to it, and these barriers do violate the Canada Health Act and its provisions on universality. It's so obvious. I told him, I said quite simply, if he'd get real about trans hormone replacement and talk about how the NDP was spending money making it harder for vulnerable people, mostly women, to buy basic reproductive medicine that's safer than aspirin, I'd help his campaign in any capacity. And I heard, well, would you like to run for us? And then I got a whole bunch of delaying tactics with respect to actually getting real on the HRT issue, which I thought was staggering, because if you're a conservative in Alberta and you know that there's an issue you're pretty much never able to mention in any context without being bashed as some antediluvian tradcon, it's the relative ease with which one reproductive right, the right to terminate a viable pregnancy, is centered by New Democrats and the mainstream or legacy feminist movement generally. And so here I am trying to get any conservative other than myself, because the mainstream media tries very, very hard to ignore me, to simply ask, why is it harder for a trans woman to buy estrogen than a cis woman to receive a government-funded abortion? Especially when the way in which the denial occurs is very clearly systematic and in violation of a human rights law that the NDP took a victory lap for amending.
Just to jump in here, Valerie, could you maybe elaborate a bit on the barriers and the steps that trans women have to go through in order to get hormone treatment?
Sure. Okay. Well, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with the old Pierre Trudeau abortion law, where they decriminalized abortion, but you had to go through a special panel of 3 doctors, and they would vote yes or no. And it was majority rules as to whether or not a therapeutic abortion would be provided. And that was the law in Canada for abortion between 1968 and 1988, when Regina versus Morgentaler was decided. Trans people face something similar and yet dramatically worse. If you're trans, you go to your family doctor, any walk-in clinic, and you ask for hormone replacement, and they could provide it, but almost invariably don't, even though very safe medicine. There's no contraindications that trans women face that cis women don't. No, instead what they'll do, if you're lucky, is refer you to one of the 2 gender clinics in the province. So you're evaluated by a psychiatrist, who will then refer you to an endocrinologist. And effectively, all 3 of those doctors have a veto. So you're a lot more likely to be denied this medicine. I had an endocrinologist referral in 2010 pushed back because I was wearing pants and a sweater and no makeup. As you see right now, I'm wearing no makeup to my intake interview. And the doctor, Lauren Warnicki, was, according to what I had been told by the receptionist, not sure I was serious. So yeah, there's a lot of very insulting and classically, sexist and sanist, just arbitrary bullshit that goes into deciding who can or can't get this medicine, how long of a fight they have. And the argument that I've heard from the community is we need more affirming care. But in fact, we just need lower barriers. My best friend, her life changed dramatically when she got hormone replacement, and the doctor writing her the prescription was like, this won't make you a real woman, right? What mattered more, the invalidating thing or the incredibly efficacious medicine? Well, those who are out want the invalidating thing to be focused on because they're not being denied the incredibly efficacious medicine. I thought the incredibly efficacious medicine mattered more, So those are the barriers. What also happens is, while people are seeking an endocrinologist referral, they still haven't received estrogenic hormone replacement yet. They may be on anti-androgens, so to some extent the sex dysphoria is lessened, but it doesn't go away entirely under those circumstances. Especially again when you're dealing with one of the hormonal sources of stress. And so at that point, the doctors are pushing genital reconstruction. There was a working group in the UK in the NHS, and they had doctors discussing issues with trans patients transitioning, and many of them voiced concerns about those who would access hormone replacement and then not seek genital reconstruction, saying that it was an alarming rise in the number of, as they put them, she men. That was discussed. That was reported on by Zoe O'Connell. And then you also look at Sweden, which is this supposed bastion of gender inclusion. It's interesting. They have about 1%. When I last checked, and that may have narrowed, 1% the rate of transition as the United Kingdom, where you had an opportunity to go around the NHS. In Sweden, where they had 1% the rate of transition, they were also requiring sterilization as a condition of treatment up until 2013. To me, it doesn't, knowing what I know now, it doesn't seem that out of place that they were also funding performances of the Scum Manifesto, which is a famous radical cisfeminist tract.
Could you tell us a bit about the Scum Manifesto? I don't think most of our listeners would be familiar.
Oh yeah, no, I highly recommend you all look it up and read it. SCUM stands for Society for Cutting Up Men, and it was written by a radical cisfeminist activist, Valerie Keefe, in, I believe, 1968. No, 1967 is when it was published. I'm just looking at it, getting a copy now. The really interesting thing about the Scum Manifesto is how it seems like it's a blueprint for what we've seen with respect to gender politics and the out trans community these days, especially trans women. In the essay, Valerie Keefe effectively assumes 100% of male-assigned people are trans women, though she doesn't say it that way. She assumes that trans femininity is natural in the male-assigned and a repressed urge, and that cisfeminists should exploit that urge to essentially enact their entire political program. Oh my word! I could go into this, but it's more vulgar than even I am on a bad day. And I wouldn't know where to start, and I wouldn't know where to finish. That's the other issue.
Maybe we can move into talking about, because one of the reasons I reached out to you is I saw you in a comments thread making comments about the effectiveness of requiring people to state their pronouns when they're in a class, or BC just passed legislation that requires lawyers to state their pronouns in courts. And you had an interesting argument about this. So
and in fact, that is referenced in the Scum Manifesto as well, not the declaration of pronouns itself, but that one of the things that Solanus wanted was for every male-assigned person to have to continue to state their maleness at the beginning of a I would call it emotional unsupport group, which she refers to as a turd session. Yeah, you have to read the thing. It's kind of difficult to approach piecemeal. But the problem with pronoun declarations, and especially the problem with mandatory pronoun declarations, is it forces every closeted trans person to lie, either to everyone but themselves or to everyone including themselves. They're continually required to reinforce an identity which they are assigned at birth, and one that frankly is coercive. And this doesn't have the same negative political impacts for trans men, because cis women are not problematized in left-wing spaces. Trans men are not problematized in left-wing spaces. Cis men are, but the thing is that closeted trans women are not cis men. They're evaluated under standards that basically don't give trans women permission to be women, either out or closeted, to the same degree that cis women get permission to be women. I mean, I think there's a lot of validity to privilege theory. What is really worrisome is the self-serving fashion in which it's applied. And what we end up focusing on is the signal, the avowed identity. And that's where I think that this ends up connecting into neoliberalism and the way in which gender and identity politics have effectively become neoliberal. They raise the signal over the reality, and people don't consider the impacts of what they're doing in a structural fashion. They just look for the poster boy or girl. I hope that.
So maybe you could explain if you have a theory on how and why the whole pronoun declaration thing came about, and how that impacts trans women and how that serves the cis feminist establishment.
Yeah. Pronoun declarations came about. Again, they're mentioned in the Scum Manifesto. When Solanus calls for, let me just see if I can't find it here. Let's see. 1, 2, 3. Ah, yes. Scum will kill. This is. I can't even remember what paragraph this is. This is about last third of the essay. Scum will kill all men who are not in the men's auxiliary of scum. Men in the men's auxiliary are those men who are working diligently to eliminate themselves. Men who, regardless of their motives, do good. Men who are playing pal with scum. A few examples of the men and in the men's auxiliary are men who kill men, biological scientists who are working on constructive programs as opposed to biological warfare, journalists, writers, editors, publishers, and producers who disseminate and promote ideas that will lead to the achievement of scum's goals, faggots who, by their shimmering, flaming example, encourage other men to demand themselves and thereby make themselves relatively inoffensive, men who consistently give things away, money, things, services, men who tell it like it is, so far not one ever has, who will put women straight, who reveal the truth about themselves, who give the mindless male-females correct sentences to parrot, who tell them the woman's primary goal in life should be to squash the male sex, to aid men in this endeavor. Scum will conduct turd sessions, at which every male present will give a speech beginning with the sentence, "I am a turd, a lowly, abject turd," and then proceed to list all the ways in which he is. That ends up in a much softer, more choicest way, becomes pronoun declarations and privilege checks. And what worries me, well, it doesn't worry me. I mean, it's what incenses me. And I went through this again 20 years ago in the Young New Democrats of Alberta. Is that we're asking people who don't have privilege to check privilege they don't have, and to continually have to recontextualize themselves and defend themselves politically from that perspective, unless they are on board with this fake left, faux aggressive ideology here that we have masquerading as anti-oppression politics.
Awesome, thank you. I think our audience, we've given them a fairly detailed discussion about the Scum Manifesto and that sort of stuff. So if to look it up on their own, I think it's something they should absolutely look into. But let's move on from that and maybe discuss why you think that genital surgery is being pushed over HRT, especially in North America. I mean, that's certainly not the case in Southeast Asian countries, where it's pretty common for them to have trans women who maintain their genitals but go on surgery. Why do you think that's more prevalent in the West to be pushed?
Well, and again, it's because there's a few reasons, but it costs a lot more to provide a genital reconstruction surgery. And as Paul Krugman has quite aptly noted, my spending is your income and your spending is my income. So that may have something to do with it, that a low-cost therapeutic is far less desirable than a high-cost intervention that requires a whole lot of credentialed people around to provide and monitor. That could be part of it. I think also we have to look at the intersection of cissexism and the degree to which, as I mentioned with that gender working group in the NHS, the degree to which they think a woman is indistinguishable from a cis woman, that therefore I have to have something that at least approximates a vagina to be a woman, as opposed to having hardwired structures in my midbrain that cause me to have less depression in the prevalence of cisfeminine typical levels of hormones. Yeah, it's more expensive. It's also because of the severe consequences and side effects of it. It indicates to many what they would consider seriousness. I had one conservative politician compare genital reconstruction to crossing the Rubicon. So to them, it seems like a good dividing line with respect to extending rights because of the severity of it. And as a result, that's a valuable signal to them. And one thing I think that distinguishes neoliberalism from classical liberalism is the emphasis on signals and how they effectively are reality, as opposed to the actual impacts of things.
Awesome, thank you. So maybe, because I recall when we were first talking, you gave a speech on former Wild Rose member, remind me of her name.
Danielle Smith?
Yeah, Danielle Smith. Gave a talk on her radio show, and you also seem to have sort of switched over from the NDP, which was, of course, run under Rachel Notley at the time we were discussing when they were in power, a more conservative, classical liberal oriented parties. Could you maybe tell us about what it means to be a trans woman who orients herself more right of center or near center? Because a lot of the times I think the expectation is that most trans people are far left or fall in with a neoliberal or far left ideology.
Well, actually, that while I was inclined to support her election in 2015, I've been a classical conservative since 2003. I was a delegate for David Orchard. So I don't actually consider myself to be on the right or the center. I consider myself to be left-wing, especially in the Petersonian sense, that I am a critic of the existing hierarchy, and I think it's gotten deeply corrupt and isn't nearly as meritocratic as the skill set of those who are in the elite would suggest. What's it like? Constant emotional blackmail. Constant emotional blackmail. A whole bunch of smirking master brains telling me, your rights are never going to be defended by them. Your rights are never going to be defended by them. Don't you understand that that all you're doing is you're hurting your own community? This while being basically asked to shut up and uncritically support a government that spent millions of dollars, actually really tens of millions of dollars when you count what we spend on providing prescriptions to cis women, and how that also does not need to be behind a prescription. Again, we're talking medicine safer than aspirin. We spent tens of millions of dollars over the life of the government entrenching barriers to this medicine, but don't worry, because she lit the legislature up in trans pride colors. So I take issue with the fact that with neoliberalism as being left-wing, it's certainly marketing itself that way, but it's very pro-hierarchical. Really, all that these wokesters are looking for, it seems, in terms of their political program, is a more demographically diverse boardroom, but that they're not really talking about any significant change. Zizek calls it revolution without revolution. Since you can't deliver any actual change, since you can't really empower workers, since you're not going to roll back the security state in any way, why not have more non-binary Indigenous CEOs? Problem solved?
So talking about all these issues, I think there's a sentiment that a lot of the times these narratives that end up being adopted in the workplaces, like mandatory pronoun declaration, start on college campuses. And us having a college audience, maybe you could speak to the ways in which you think these dialogues could be changed, or where you'd think these dialogues should go on campuses in order to achieve true parity for trans people.
How should campus dialogues change in order to achieve true parity for trans people? Well, I mean, that one's interesting because I don't think you're ever going to stop humans from being hardwired to break into small and insular groups of 150. I think the solution's a lot more economic and a lot more broad-based than that. But thank you once again for reminding me. This is a largely university audience. You have my sympathy because you guys are in on the last rung of one of the biggest Ponzi schemes ever perpetrated on the industrialized world. That's part of the problem. Like and it really does feed into things. If you haven't read Listen Liberal yet, that's by Thomas Frank. I highly recommend it. If you haven't engaged with some of the work of Thomas Piketty on how ostensible left-wing and social democratic parties have become captured by the credentialed classes, he calls them the Brahmin left. I think that's super valuable. What's happened is that the focus, and again, as I said, neoliberalism is elevating signals over reality, like the Bush administration staffer who was contradicted on something with Iraq war policy and said, don't you understand, when we make a press release, we create our own reality. Pronoun declarations are just another way of signaling that you care about trans inclusion without actually having to do anything that pursues real trans inclusion. We have an economy that is increasingly based on economic rents that flow to credentials for no good reason. In the United States, 70% of the increase from post-secondary credentials come from the last credit. In Canada, it's 110%. Those with some college earn less than those with no college. So if you're in, do try to finish. I know I wasn't able to. I had to leave a pretty nasty home at the time, but the difference is night and day in terms of income. And it's not night and day in terms of aptitude. And so those economic rents flowing to having that credential, and as a result, repeating a whole lot of establishment ideology, have completely distorted our economy. And as a result, they also distort social capital. They also distort activist movements. I think if you really want to start changing the system, especially if you consider yourselves left-wing, take as much economics as you can, and you don't need to take it from a professor. Try and find as many perspectives, try and find as many thinkers, because a lot of the issues that we face are very subtle. They're incentive based. They're the product of power relationships, and I know that would be something that the other more famous ex-Alberta New Democrat that I admire, Jordan Peterson, would disagree with, that he thinks it's more merit than power. But I think we've run out of merit. I think smart people are negotiating these systems better. That doesn't mean that smart people are making a whole lot of decisions. I think they're incentivized not to. So I hope that answers your question.
No, that's great. Thank you. And since we've got, I think we'll probably open up questions pretty soon here. But maybe before that, if you could just tell us about, because this is a BC group based out of University of British Columbia, and you being from Alberta, you'd be more aware of some of the political issues of the province next door. So maybe if you just because I do know you're quite politically involved in many issues, if you'd just like to talk about some other issues regarding freedom or liberty occurring right now, or if not, if there's anything else you'd like to discuss.
Other issues regarding freedom or liberty. It would be nice if we had some. It's well, I guess we could talk about. It's interesting. I I have a lot of sympathy for President Trump over the last few months, because one thing that happened after I got myself expelled from the Freedom Conservatives, I was invited back in because I was getting more media exposure than the party.
Why were you expelled?
Oh, I was expelled over. I was expelled because I pulled a Yes Men style political stunt. Where I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Yes Men. What they do is they make an announcement so that the political or corporate leader in question has to get out on the podium and say no, they're not doing anything of that nature, so that the truth is revealed via this misdirection. So yeah, after 4 years, or not 4 years, after 4 months of getting absolutely jerked around by the Freedom Conservative leadership, as Derek was preparing to start that campaign, which I think for a campaign in the 2012 election, beautifully run. Not so much 2019. I put out a press release and a campaign announcement via meme video. God, I feel so old when I talk and hear myself. Anyway, I put out a campaign announcement saying that Derek was going to file a human rights complaint based on the NDP's 2-track system for hormone replacement access. And yeah, had a very spicy announcement video, which I don't know if you've got the link to. I have no idea how to do the present now function. It's sad. But I announced via downfall meme. And they said that as it was fictitious, even though the party constitution says that defamation is the standard, not fictitious, that I was going to be expelled, and expelled faster, by the way, than the Constitution allowed. I was expelled 5 days after I released the video. Meanwhile, the Constitution says you can only be expelled at a board meeting called with 7 days notice. But it wasn't the first time, and it wasn't the last time that they ignored the Constitution. They were required to have a leadership election by, I want to say May 2nd. I know it was 320 days, or not 320, 360 days after David White was sworn in as interim leader. No, not after David White was sworn in, after Derek Fildebrandt resigned. And they just didn't. They just kind of ignored it because they decided they wanted to merge with Wexit. But I had declared, and I even declared on Danielle Smith's show. We were talking conversion therapy that day. And yeah, they just flat out ignored their constitutional obligations. So I guess, they were protecting the integrity of the leadership election process. Actually, it's ironic. That was one of the things they hid behind, is they said they were going to have a vetting committee for leadership candidates. And I'm like, isn't that what an election is? But I don't know. I'm old-fashioned. I think it's an affront to democracy when you effectively let a revolutionary council decide who can and can't run for office, as they do in Iran. Yeah, when it comes to free speech issues and freedom generally, speech policing has gotten ridiculous, and it's very obvious, at least to me, and I would hope to some of the more left-wing minded people in your audience paying attention, that it's not about going after the right. It's about going after anyone who gets outside of official ideology. I got a hateful conduct ban for saying that I preferred policy that caused fewer queers to die and climate change to stop, when I was talking about gay-straight alliances and how those who go through extreme bullying are actually more likely to attempt suicide if they participate in the GSA than those extreme bullying survivors who don't. Because, again, if you're asked to check privilege you don't have, and that's going to be a bit of a Durkheim-style suicide stressor. You're being told that your issues don't matter to other people and that you are indeed seen as a burden. And if that's out of concord with reality, that's going to be even more likely to do you in. And I hate to tell folks, but no, most queer teenagers are not openly queer teenagers. We may like to think so, but no. Let's see. But did anyone want to see the downfall meme that got me kicked out of the party? It was so worth it.
I think it's pretty long, because I know I watched it on a previous occasion. So maybe we can link it for our audience afterwards.
Okay.
But yeah.
Give me time to run to the washroom, but.
All right. I think we're probably ready to open it up for comments and questions. So yeah, so we can just wait here for a moment and see if anyone joins.
I'm just going to step out for just 30 seconds then, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, guys. Okay, I'm back. Yeah, I was going to say I had alluded to it earlier, but I was saying that what I've encountered in dealing with hormone replacement gatekeeping reminds me a great deal of what we've been encountering with the lockdowns, the unwillingness to engage with really effective therapeutics, gatekeepers who make really arbitrary decisions with respect to treatment, like based on dress, based on where you work. That actually for a long time was a requirement that you had to be holding down a job to receive transition medicine. So there were essential trannies and non-essential trannies, I guess. I guess that's the only other thought that I have to add at this exact second.
All right, awesome. I think we've got some questions coming in just a moment here.
I apologize, guys, for the crap tier speech.
No, thank you very much for joining us, Valerie.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I have written about this in longer form and shorter form, and it just, I don't know. Sometimes writer's block is when you have too many ideas, and that seems to have been where I've been the last few weeks.
I guess before questions come in, we were talking earlier about the weather's pretty bad in Edmonton, and you were saying that had the weather not been so bad, you were going to go to the anti-lockdown protests. Do you regularly attend those?
Probably. I mean, I've gotten back into it this month. I was not heavily involved recently, and part of that was a little bit of shame. When I suspended my leadership campaign on Valentine's Day of last year, I actually called for a quarantine of the Americas because there was no response then. And the virus looked a whole lot deadlier on a per patient basis. And I've just been watching everyone who takes these emergency dictatorial powers basically ignore the lesson of Cincinnatus, which is if you're going to do something extra constitutional, you constantly have to be checking whether or not you need to be doing it instead of waiting until there's overwhelming resistance. I guess it was overly optimistic of me to hope that people in a position of power actually take it up with some degree of reluctance, especially when it comes to this level of power. And for that, I am sorry, guys. But yeah, I've been coming out to the lockdown protests the last few weeks. There's an Antifa presence there now, which is interesting. I don't know why anarcho-communists think that we should all be following corporate and government mandates, but I don't know. Anarcho-communism moves in very, very strange ways that are totally not Stalinism without writing things down at all.
All right, I think Lillian's going to ask our first question here.
Okay. Hello?
Hello.
Hi. Valerie, I was listening to your talk and I've really enjoyed it so far. I know that that you need gender dysphoria in order to be trans. So do you align with the trans? Oh, okay. Do you align with the trans med community that says that you need gender dysphoria in order to be trans? Or do you think that only gender euphoria is required?
Oh, well, no, I don't think you need a specific diagnosis, but let me put it this way. Here's how I differ from the people that the very choicest types in the trans community called true scum. They think you need they think that you need to go through certain medical hoops in order to be trans. I think that being trans tends to suggest certain medical needs. So yeah, you're more likely to experience depression if you don't have proper endocrinology, and we've found this with cis women who get premenstrual dysphoria disorder, where suicidality is a literal symptom, and that happens when androgens spike and estrogens crash. Same with increased rates of depression among those who have polycystic ovarian syndrome. And oh, one of my favorites, there's a columnist, I think her name's Holly Grigg Spall, who writes for The Guardian, who actually, I guess it's 5 years ago now, wrote about a study that demonstrated that cis women on a progesterone-only birth control pill had higher rates of depression than those who took a progesterone estrogen birth control pill. So yeah, you don't need a classical diagnosis, but it helps. You know, it's gonna show up more frequently, or things that match those symptoms will show up more frequently. And yeah, proper endocrinology is definitely a medical need for both cis people and trans people. It just comes up a whole lot more frequently when you're trans. Some people's bodies cooperate, which is nice.
Thanks, Valerie.
Yeah.
You can kick me now, Tate.
Maybe if
Definitely does not have to be about trans issues. I am a political economist going way back, so you know I've been in politics on some level since I was 5.
What did you start doing politics with when you were 5?
When I was 5, things were starting to get really crappy at my home, and I had just started kindergarten, and there was this playground that we couldn't use as kindergartners. It would rotate by grade, but we weren't included in the rotation. And I lobbied the teachers, and they were like, "Oh, I don't know. There's a whole lot more kids." I'm like, "Well, okay, but we're only there for a half day, and we're also smaller. You could group us with the grade ones." And they actually changed the policy. It's the only time when I've been factually correct that a policy has just changed because I asked, and they spoiled me for the rest of my life. I've been stuck ever since, thinking that if the facts are on my side, I don't really need to bang on the defense table. But there I am.
And when did you become involved with more formal politics?
Oh, well, let's see. I was I organized classroom political parties when I was like in 3rd grade. Gosh, I'm almost ashamed to admit back then I was the leader of the grade 3 Liberal Party, but it was okay, you know. It was 1990, and they were anti-globalist at the time. More and more formally was in university. I got, actually everyone there got advice from their from our political science professor, who's still there, that if you want to be,
Valerie,
you better join.
It looks like we've got a question from David.
See, and you told me that other memes would be far too involved. That's
okay. You can continue, Valerie. Sorry about that.
No, I didn't have anything. I don't know. To answer the spirit of David's question, I think that perhaps loyalty to a particular vehicle is overrated these days, and that we should often be guided by conscience. Something that Danielle Smith has gotten in trouble for on the eve of the 2015 election. Her and many other Alliance members crossing over and joining the Progressive Conservatives under Jim Prentice. And it was always so interesting to me that because I knew Jim Prentice the first time in the context of David Orchard's leadership run. Prentice ended up on the last ballot, losing to Peter MacKay, thanks to that infamous deal that David had inked. And one thing I would say about that guy is he always stabbed you in the front. He was always very direct about why he thought something wouldn't work, why something wasn't the ideal course to take. And, we had no other option at that point than to take, the promise of someone who it's become obvious has no interest in keeping them. And so that was one nice thing about the conservative leadership races. Peter MacKay, once again, being dogged by that level of rank and honesty. But it was frustrating because after you sign a deal like that, I always thought you have to apply a political consequence. And that was the one thing that David Orchard didn't do. But I digress.
Do we have some text questions, Lillian?
Yes, I have a question from Corky Day in the chat. He wants to know, Valerie Keefe, you seem to be saying that hormones for minors are harmless and prevent suicide. What if these minors change their minds on being trans, and what if they fake being suicidal?
Well, I don't think that being suicidal should be a necessary criterion in the first place. What if they regret being trans? I don't know. What if I regret not accessing transition sooner? What exactly is the difference between a cis puberty and a trans puberty? I'm not particularly in favor of giving hormones to, people who are prepubescent, but people who are post-pubescent, I think that makes a whole lot more sense than what we're currently giving out, which is Lupron, which is a much more expensive drug that delays all hormonal expression, is linked to lupus, is linked to liver damage, is linked to mandibular necrosis, which is to say jaw rot. And I think if you are more interested
What the fuck, Lillian? What's going on?
I don't know. Just leave me alone for a sec.
I don't think you should be the one doing this.
I'm not good at.
Okay, I feel less bad about being a poor girl's Luddite at this point.
We've got some disruptors, it seems, joining, but
well, good for them. I'm always happy to answer any questions. I'm always happy to deal with any criticism. I'm kind of very old school that way. Is that I tend to think that a heckler is just a debate partner who hasn't been tested.
That's a good philosophy, I think. I think that's something that people could lighten up about a bit. I think too many people are afraid to engage in conversation with someone who has opposing views to them. And I think that's one of the things that definitely needs changing on university.
Yeah, and they don't even need to be like, this is the thing too, is that when it comes to civility, I think what's happened is we've made a major mistake where we conflate sounding like you've got to stick up your butt with being civil. If somebody is upset and insulting, that's not nearly as bad as them refusing to engage with what the speaker is saying. And what they were inherently arguing. I mean, I wasn't even saying that hormone replacement should be over the counter for minors. So, you know, as I say,
maybe that's because our stream's still frozen. So let's just wait until we get back online.
Okay, put a pin in that. Still, I mean, I segued from a Rickroll.
Rickroll is good.
Yeah.
And then we had the same guy playing static twice, and that's as a Rickroll.
That's some classic antifuckery right there. That's yeah. Oh, it was so interesting when I went to counter protest the Trans Day of Remembrance because they had 2 members of the Notley government on the dais. There were like 4 of these hard leftist so that they wouldn't be able to see it. They're really afraid of an open debate. Mm-hmm. It's so amazing. You know, I find it so interesting that they want to back up their ideas with force against people while one of their slogans is people over property. It's like their intellectual property
right now.
Sorry?
Is people over property an NDP slogan in Alberta right now?
Not an NDP. That was an Antifa one, but I mean,
okay. I don't know. I'm not overly familiar with Antifa lore.
Yeah, I was listening to an Andy No interview earlier today. It's so interesting. Just the vehemence of the reaction. It's like, and when you look at his campus reporting career, it's like you can see how Andy came to the political positions that he's at, and all they do is they monsterize the guy, and I'm like, really? Maybe don't. Maybe there's a broader, you know, left-wing argument to be made about corporate control of media messaging, and maybe that has something positive to say, but no, you're not allowed to say anything bad about certain. They're not even protected groups. They're protected speakers for an official ideology, and the group identity is forever leveraged to silence those who disagree.
All right, we've got a question from Tom here, just written up. He says, how do you feel about the timeline of progression regarding trans rights and issues in Western society over the last several years / decades? Is it going too slow, too fast? What do you think ought to be the main area of focus for activist groups?
I mean, I don't know if it's going too slow or too fast, so much as twirling, always twirling. What's happening is, and I mentioned this earlier with Zizek talking about how no real meaningful change is coming from the neoliberal fake left, so they have to focus on increasingly performative things. I think that's what's happening now. The progress of rights, it's worrisome because I really feel like the community is setting itself up for a backlash, not by moving too fast, but by moving in selective, provocative areas that not only don't help the most vulnerable in the community, but seem just designed to piss people off for no good reason. They're way more interested in a 14-year-old trans boy transitioning at 14 instead of 18 than they are a 41-year-old trans woman transitioning. And to me, that's not a big surprise. Another trans feminist writer, Julia Serrano, who wrote a book called Whipping Girl, which I think is excellent, and I think kind of one of the early works of second wave transfeminism, or what we will look back on as second wave transfeminism, talked about the exclusion of trans women and the inclusion of trans men in cisfeminist spaces. She was talking about radical cisfeminist spaces, such as the Michigan Women's Music Festival. But what she said was they include trans men because they don't respect them as men, and they exclude trans women because they don't respect them as women. And it's so interesting that you see on the left and the rhetoric around the trans community. It seems to be the only community in which women's issues are never really centered. It's all very slushy, and all of a sudden there's a whole lot of concern about remaining gender inclusive. And I'm like, well, that might be because the trans women in the community aren't really respected as women, and the trans men in the community aren't really respected as men. Leaving aside the attempt of a lot of cis feminists to turn the works of Judith Butler into a gender identity. There was this hilarious, I don't know if it's hilarious, but I found it funny. Ryan Long sketch. I don't know if anyone else is familiar with Ryan Long. He's the one who put out that YouTube video, the woke person and the racist have the exact same racial politics. But one of the things he was doing a video recently is like, is the non-binary community sufficiently diverse? He was saying, it seems like all the non-binary people are white women in their 20s. And I'm like, well, when ideologically you've said that there is no relation between transition and mental health, or next to no relation between transition and mental health, and that gender is a completely arbitrary social construct as opposed to perhaps an inaccurate description of something that's real and underlying and biological. That kind of lost my train of thought, which I've been doing a lot today. It really seems like there's not a lot of concern for the really basic rights, and there's a lot of concern for representation and culture war issues that are designed either to produce a backlash or even more so to ingrain a lot of problematic ideas in the heads of the next generation. I mean, I'll tell you, I think there's a reason there's no bookish trans lesbian story hour, but there's a drag queen story hour. Actually, it reminds me of a column that Michelle Landsberg wrote on Vancouver Rape Relief about 20 years ago. There's a paragraph that says, want to cross-dress and send up our culture's gender strictures by playing the vamp with a feather boa and sequins? Fine, but don't show up at the Rape Crisis Center and ask to counsel women who've been victimized by male sexual violence. Imagine a raped woman fleeing to the safety of a woman-only center, only to be confronted by a former man who had never shared any of those formative female experiences. And we'll include that in the links later as well. But I mean, that's one of those things. This issue shouldn't just be about out trans people. We should be looking at oppression structurally, and we should be looking at to what extent does cissexism and its intersection with misogyny, if we're being intersectional feminists, which we're supposed to be, so I've been told, to what extent are we erasing male-assigned rape victims and abuse victims and assault victims and mass incarceration victims and homelessness victims because we don't really see violence against them as concerning.
Awesome. We'll ask, George, if you can ask your question, that would be fantastic. Or if you just want to send it in the chat, you can take a look at the chat there, Valerie, if you'd like. George says, have you ever had any particularly weird issues with the left in your day-to-day life?
Any particularly weird issue with the left in my day-to-day life? It just feels like my day-to-day life. God, any particularly weird issues with the left? Well, again, I mean, I always want to like. It's hard because I can't pronounce the little trademark symbol after the left when I'm talking about what has devolved into the left. I often, being way too nerdy and in love with jargon, call them social neoliberals, because I really think what we've witnessed is, any pretense that the left had to social democracy has just gone by the wayside, and it's neoliberalism, but a woker boardroom. Weird things with the left. I mean, God. What isn't weird right now in the last few years? What isn't weird? I mean, God, I live in a province where the social services critic for the New Democrats, Marie Renaud, says you shouldn't use the R word, but at the same time doesn't really address the fact that while 20% of Albertans roughly are disabled, fewer than 2% receive assured income for the severely handicapped. I don't know. You tell me which one's more retarded. Like it's the elevation of signals and the elevation of language over action has. I mean, I don't think that's something that's unique to the left, but I think it's something that has definitely has entered full flower on the left. I mean, it's no more ridiculous than it is there. Let's see. Here was a good one. I was at a Parkland conference on understanding populism, where I was the only populist and where they did not want to understand me. I'm subsequently banned from the Parkland Institute's events, but I digress. But they had a speaker there talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And if you go by avowed identity, that's 30% of missing and murdered Indigenous people. Why exactly do 3 Indigenous lives with 3 uteri matter more than 7 Indigenous lives without uteri? I am waiting for the fake left to get back to me on that one. But afterwards, I asked that question. And the speaker very adroitly was like, well, why isn't this including white women? And I'm like, that's not my concern, because white cis women are at lower risk of being missing and murdered, not higher risk than Indigenous cis women. But as opposed to male assigned Indigenous people who are at higher risk of being missing or murdered than Indigenous cis women. Anyway, afterwards, the speaker catches up with me and says, well, I have this discussion with a great deal of women. And I'm like, yes, but most of them are cis. And she says, no, they're not. I'm like, no, they're assigned female at birth. Yes. Well, and then she goes off and says, well, we have a different conception of gender, which is, that's been one thing that's been really interesting, is watching the pink washing of a lot of gender institutions that are outside of the West traditionally, like pretending it's magically woke to have a third gender group that you dump all trans women into, and also pretending that those practices were universal among First Nations, when the repopularization of the term Two-Spirit is 31 years old now. It came back at a conference in 1990 and doesn't really accurately represent the traditions of all First Nations by a long shot. So I think to some extent it's been that. It's been the real clown world stuff. If you want to, if you need to find peak honk, is when horizontal oppression is framed as inclusion and anti-oppression politics, merely because of the degree to which those practicing the horizontal oppression are disprivileged on some other axis. But yeah, I can't think of a specific weirdness thing at this point. There's just too much weird.
All right, we have another question here, it looks like. Thank you for stepping in, George.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. You'll have to excuse my dog. She just saw a squirrel outside. Valerie, I heard you mention that you think that GSAs or gay straight alliances, at my school we had a QSA, a queer straight alliance, that they can be harmful and that kids who are part of them commit suicide at a higher rate than those who aren't part of them. Do you think that could be just because the types of kids who are joining these groups are those who are looking for friends and looking for an inclusive space, and not necessarily because queer straight alliances in themselves are harmful?
That's a very good question, actually, and that's we definitely tend to have a correlation causation problem a lot these days when making political arguments. So you're right, but in fact, it wasn't those who participated; it was extreme bullying survivors. Those students who reported that they faced extreme amounts of bullying. And those extreme bullying survivors who participated were more likely not to have killed themselves, but to have to attempted suicide than those extreme bullying survivors who had not participated. And this was a study that was mentioned and then very rapidly discarded in the abstract to the Sawich study. I haven't got that in front of me, but the study that the NDP used to justify their position on queer straight alliances or gay straight alliances. One thing you have to consider is you have to consider who is out of the closet and when, and the degree to which current queer politics tends to focus on avowed identity. So the median age of transition for the average out trans man or trans masculine person is 26. For the average out trans woman, it's 42. The first quartile starts at 26. That's when I got out. When I saw that data, I realized how comparatively lucky I was and how much suffering I had been spared. And it tended to radicalize me when it came to paying attention to these barriers to entry. I also did participate for a short period of time while closeted in a GSA, and it's like it's a bit of a different vibe. So you're very right that what could be happening is that there's a selection of people who are more vulnerable in the first place. But I think that when you compare extreme bullying survivors who do participate to extreme bullying survivors who don't, then you're looking at a group that is vulnerable across the board. And that we need to at least be taking a very, very hard look with respect to the impacts of these groups and the practices that they promote, because there's a lot of cisfeminist ideology in the curricula for most of these. There's a lot of identity first, pronoun declaration practices that can end up reinforcing something on someone who's already carrying a little bit too much. I hope that answers your question. If you have a follow-up in here.
Awesome, thank you. It looks like we have Rashoman in the chat. Do you have a question for us? I think we're open now. So yeah, feel free to ask your question.
Not hearing anything.
I don't think if you want to unmute yourself, I think you're on mute right now. Okay.
You've got.
Here they. Okay, they say, you've got to be kidding me. I've been further, even more decided to use, even go need to do look more as anyone can. Can you really be, I think this sounds like auto-generated stuff. I don't know. I can't really, can you see the chat here? Does this can you understand what this means, or does this look like,
Well, I am being told it's just common sense. You've got to be kidding me. I've been further even more decided to use even, go, need, to do, look more as anyone can.
Yeah, I think they're using
choice level stuff. That's all I can say. Oh no, wait. Maybe Rashomon is gonna. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, that's.
Is it even then that he has really been far even has decided to use even, go, want? I don't know. It feels like there's some syntax there about.
Oh, he's having troubles with his paste bin. He says. It's yeah. That was what's the not Ulysses, the other James Joyce one that's written in the midnight language. It read like that. Finnegan's Wake. Yeah, it read very much like Finnegan's Wake.
I need to read Finnegan's Wake. I need to read Ulysses. I don't know. My problem is I end up dealing with a lot of what Hayek called secondhand dealers of information. Speaking of someone else who I haven't read but have heard enough of the big bits of, I tend, though it's always great when I can directly engage with a thinker. Usually, I'm taking other people's insights from those thinkers, just because there's too much stuff to read.
Okay. Looks like they have a full question.
Okay.
You've obviously got a wealth of personal experience here. Is there you can hop on the voice chat if you want. If nothing's coming, I'd say in the next 30 seconds here, we're probably gonna assume this is just someone messing with us, because unfortunately that's happened a couple of times already.
Oh, it's fine. I mean, then you have a nice recording that, like, here's someone who's not here in good faith, but I'm not saying that you aren't here in good faith yet, Rashomon. Because yes, I definitely have a wealth of personal experience. I think we all do, and we all have individual perspectives on what's happening.
Okay, yeah. I think this is a troll.
They don't like wear shirts on Thursdays. Oh yeah, no, that's interesting. You should try Ontario, because I know that they're pretty gender neutral about the shirt restrictions. Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't think they're
partially because I don't like to wear shirts on Thursdays, and I've canceled for it at my local mall a couple of times. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right. Well, this is more engagement than I usually get from the fake left. So.
All right. Goodbye, Rashomon, but enjoy your day. All right, Lillian, another question from Corky we have here.
Yes. So Corky Day says, are trans women in women's sports going to create a huge successful backlash?
I don't think so long as it's not. The South Park episode was actually really good at playfully going, okay, we know there's a line. I personally don't see the sensicality in having sex segregated sports at any rate. It's like, oh, there's a natural physical advantage. Great. There's a natural physical advantage for Kenyans in long distance running. Do we have a separate league for them? No. There may indeed be some advantages with respect to hypertrophy, but trust me, you're going to have some significant disadvantages with respect to ability to find the motivation to train when you've got 4 times the depression prevalence of the general population. So you're going to have less muscular hypertrophy that way.
Well, if you didn't sex segregate sports, wouldn't cis women be completely left out of sports in general?
No, they're just the highest ranked cis women in sport probably wouldn't be the highest ranked in the sport typically. And
so
then
you're
also,
saying that rather than having sex segregation, we should just have like an A league and a B league, and the A league would basically consist of men and trans women, and the B league would probably end up being all the cis women.
I don't think there'd be a whole lot of trans women, at least out trans women in the A league either, because again, you got to remember taking an anti-androgen is going to have significant effects on muscle mass if we're assuming it's that straightforward. and I don't think it is. And I don't even, but yeah, I do think that promotion relegation, especially in professional sport, would be a better way to go. It's so interesting that equal pay in tennis has been such an issue, even though they don't do equal work. The men play best of 5 sets and the women play best of 3. I don't know about you. I'd like to see Serena Williams tired and trying to drag her way through a 5th set, if that's the case. It's the world is not inherently fair. Like, do we have segregation based on parental income in professional sports? Because that's a major predictor of success. Do we segregate by birth month? No, that's a major predictor of success. It just seems like there's this one arbitrary thing, and it's not like there wouldn't be a best cis woman in the world at a given sport if you eliminated sex segregation in sports. That's my own opinion. I'm still way more. I don't have particularly strong opinions on that as compared to the government is spending money denying people the right to buy basic reproductive medicine that's safer than aspirin, and it's killing people. And I don't know. I would like the tens of millions of dollars to be spent on, crazy, commie priorities like roads and schools, instead of trying to decide which trans person passes the cis-sexist doctor's beauty pageant. And to give you an idea, by the way, of how obsessed with genital reconstruction they are, I have a friend who ended up in the psych ward because she was in an abusive relationship. And she met the same doctor who pushed back my endocrinologist referral for no reason whatsoever. He just showed up and asked if she wanted genital reconstruction. I think that matters so much more than sports. Is the sports a backlash thing? Well, sure. That's why Biden and Vice President Eighth Amendment ignoring cop Kamala Harris are pushing that and not demanding that Planned Parenthood stop breaking the law, asshole. You've got a federally funded organization where the vast majority of clinics won't sell this medicine, even though they will sell it to cis women on the same terms and conditions. I think it was the last time I checked, California, 103 clinics from Planned Parenthood, 5 were providing some form of hormone replacement. That was one thing I found really interesting from the United States, actually, when it came to HRT and the backlash. There were 4 states where Planned Parenthood had informed consent hormone replacement for trans patients. All 4 of them went for President Trump. Montana, Indiana, Iowa, and North Carolina, if I recall. Meanwhile, at the same time, California had 103 clinics. 3 were providing some form of trans HRT, and it was all going through this psychiatrist gatekeeper. And I always love the ridiculous argument. Well, it's like, what if they regret it? Well, what if you regret your abortion? Should we make you sit down with a psychiatrist for a few weeks before we take that momentous step? I mean, something else could make you not want to have a kid. Maybe it's narcissistic personality disorder. Why don't we work on that? Like, the double standard is just absolutely galling and ridiculous. But the sports, I'm like, yeah. It's so low on my list and it's high on other people's lists. I think for reasons, but who honestly, other than as a means of saying whatever they want to say about the legitimacy of trans women generally, cares how many swinging dicks there are in the WNBA? Who? I can't hear you, Tate.
Sorry about that. James and Marion, James was here first. Maybe if you have, I think that question was maybe a little vague. So if you have one that you can maybe develop a bit more, that would be wonderful. And Marion, if you have any questions, feel free to send them in the chat or to ask them yourself.
Heard about Judith Butler. What's that about? I can answer that actually while that's being developed. Judith Butler is a third wave cisfeminist. The difference between third wave cisfeminists and second wave cisfeminists is second wave cisfeminists don't think I'm ever a woman. Third wave cisfeminists think I'm a woman once I say I'm a woman. So the third wave ones have taken the most privilege, the ones who have the easiest time navigating gatekeeping, and co-opted them. Believe that gender is merely an act of performance, as opposed to the performance being the product of something underlying and biological. I believe that it's something underlying and biological, because we have data that shows that when you change the endocrinology of someone, their mental health changes, and not always in the same direction. You know, testosterone isn't the happy hormone for everyone. And yeah, Judith Butler. More of a bimodal spectrum than the cisfeminists want to admit. And I think a lot of their hostility to the trans community historically, and now co-optation of it through this use of identity, while still calling every bit of criticism they receive misogyny, is really the result of their ideological belief that there's no inherent neurological difference between males and females. And as a result, there should be no labor market differentiation between the choices that males and females make.
Question in the chat there. I think you can see the chat, right, Valerie?
Oh, okay. Street activism, something we could do. Okay. Well, I would disagree with you, Marion, and I had a dramatically different position on this a year ago. I mean, March 15th of last year, I was the only one out with a mask. Now I've seen some data that there's someone who's very good at collating a lot of official data and official reportage, but who sits very much outside the Overton window, is kind of got a toe in the conspiracy sphere. Last American Vagabond. And he discusses studies from the United States Center for Disease Control and National Institute of Health, CDC and NIH, that show even if you never touch them, if you wear them absolutely perfectly, the masks they reduce viral load by 3%. Now, the degree to which that translates into reduced death is probably fairly minimal. I don't have Last American Vagabond's LinkedIn. You can find him on BitChute and you can find him on YouTube. Yeah, the degree to which the ability of masks to reduce viral load is limited, one, and then secondly, we have to look at the public health consequences of masking. Masking does indeed produce, we now acknowledge, an increase in periodontitis and cavities. It's a phenomenon called mask mouth. And one thing about periodontitis, gum disease, is it's a precursor to heart disease. So how many cases of Karen-19 are we really willing to trade for a reduced for another heart attack? That's part of the problem here. I mean, don't get me wrong, this is a category 2 pandemic. It has a case fatality rate of somewhere between 0.2 and 0.3%, and that's before the introduction of therapeutics that are showing a lot more success. And in response, we've instituted a lot of restrictions that make people feel less safe, that reduce social trust and social cohesion at the same time as our politics are getting pretty crazy. Oh, and costs us enough in terms of economic output that we probably could have cured aging. We are that close, by the way, when it comes to life extension treatments. There are some particles that have been discovered by David Sinclair at Harvard that they're pretty dramatic, but that's I guess a talk for another night. The lockdowns do dramatically more harm than good. The mask mandates do dramatically more harm than good. If you're sick, stay home. That's what we would normally do in a pandemic of this severity. And instead we are treating this as though the fatality rates are dramatically higher. and as though the impacts of our decisions, especially in public, when almost all of the deaths are occurring in care homes, where you're not going to be, running into someone who's in a care home when you're doing your grocery shopping. You're not going to be running into someone who's you're not going to be running into someone who's immunocompromised, out in public. Yeah, no, I don't think the security diapers are helping. That did remind me though. I don't know if anyone else saw the South Park pandemic special, but it's like when how much of this is about theater and how much of it is about showing compliance. There's one moment when Randy's got to get a package, but the UPS delivery guy stops him and is like, "Oh, hey, can you put a chin diaper on before that?" And he doesn't put it over his mouth. He doesn't put it over his nose. He just has it on. And the UPS guy is a lot more relaxed once he does. I think, actually, it's really interesting. At the beginning of this pandemic, Neil deGrasse Tyson said that we're running a very interesting natural experiment right now. And the question is, can we get people to listen to scientists? The thing is, we ran that experiment 60 years ago at Yale. It's called the Milgram experiment. And it turns out that if there's no one else in the room contradicting them, you can get 60% of test subjects to shock someone to death, or at least believe they've shocked someone to death. So, yeah, these things are doing more harm than good. Poverty kills. And, it's a bad flu-like illness. It is, and it creates a strain on our healthcare system. But hoping that we're going to cause an endemic disease to disappear from the population by suspending fundamental civil liberties, especially at this point, especially now that we know what we know about this virus. No, I don't support it at all.
All right. Well, unless we've got any more questions, that's probably about it. And we've gone for an hour and a half here, so I think we'll be closing up pretty soon. Are there any last remarks you had, Valerie?
Let's see. I would say, yeah. I think the point that I wanted to make about cisfeminism being the ideology that's eating the left is it's not about discrimination against out trans women. It's about the fact that because of the focus on the malfeasance done by the male assigned and identified, all of a sudden the left can't believe in root causes to crime anymore. The left can't believe in the presumption of innocence anymore. The left can't believe in social capital. They can't believe that there's any degree of material deficiency other than a deficiency in headline earnings. And the fixation is on CEO slots and not people, dying from lack of basic. And it's what's made the left not left wing anymore. And I think that's the big thing that we've been seeing the last few years is that the left isn't left wing anymore, but it's very emotionally and culturally tied to appearing as such. And some really, really interesting things politically happen. I mean, 20 years ago, if someone had told almost any leftist I know, it's like, okay, you're going to have a Republican president who's going to take on the neocons in the military-industrial complex. He's going to end second home interest deductibility and other tax breaks that disproportionately help, well-heeled people. He's going to take Noam Chomsky's advice on North Korea, and he's going to push against electronic balloting and try to bring up the recommendations that Jimmy Carter had for election integrity. I think most people would have been like, "Wow, how did things get so good?" And instead, we decided that the third coming of Hitler had arrived, and he was plated gold. The left has lost its damn mind, and it makes me sad because if they could stop being all about themselves and their own privilege and maintaining their particular spot on the ladder and living up to the absolute worst things that George Orwell ever wrote about them, they would win every election in the law. I think people have gotten a lot more progressive, and they're really tired of what they see happening, but there's no option that people have right now. You know, it's like the left has lost its mind and the right keeps hoping that they'll just ride a backlash back to 1985. And I don't think either is going to happen. All right. I think
Thank
that's
you
it.
very much for joining us here today, Valerie. Speaking to you, and I hope everyone viewing this learned lots of stuff. Yeah, thank you, and enjoy your frigid day in Edmonton if you can.
Well, I'll be staying inside for all of it, so I guess that's how I do that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and have a great day, everyone.